I'm going to introduce to you Kay Painter. Kay has been to Australia a number of times. We just can't seem to make her stay back in America. But Kay has, the first time she came out, we had rather a little bit of fun, her and I. Took them up to our Cairns branch and all the way down. And
you're not going to tell that.
I am going to tell that. Well, I'm going to tell one of the nice stories about you. But anyway, no. So, and Kay's fantastically wonderful husband, Ken, had a bad back at the time, and he was in the front seat. We hired a mini moke on Magnetic Island because not only do we make them work hard, we try to give them a bit of fun as well while they're here. So we're going up this fairly sort of rocky little twisty-turny thing, and they're freaking out because we're near the edge and whatever else. And the gear stick in a mini moke is quite a distance away from the driver as opposed to in my car where it's fairly close. This is the truth. I'm telling the true story.
I'll tell a real one later.
So every time I'd reach over, I'd touch her husband's leg, and I just met them, and he'd go, "Honey, she's touching my knee." So it became the standard joke for us. And every time I'd email over to Kay, or when I went over and stayed over there, I got to touch his knee in person again. But since then, the beautiful, wonderful, amazing man, Ken, he was a very good man. He passed away in December. So this is your first trip away since that has happened. And it is a difficult time for Kay because it has only been 6 months since Ken passed away with 9 months now with cancer. He was a very good man, so I ask you all to please keep the repose of his soul in your prayers and pray for Kay because it's a very difficult journey, as you all know, when you're on your own, and particularly in a ministry where you already are talking about something deeply personal and bearing your soul. And we just thank Kay for yet again coming out here. She's had numerous speaking engagements since she's been here, and she hasn't been allowed to rest too much because she's got a whole bunch more after today. We're all going off to Melbourne for the abortion symposium and the March for the Babies. So please welcome lovely Kay Painter, and she will tell you her life story in the book.
Now I'll tell you the real story. The truth is, he enjoyed every minute of her failing with his knee. And he would have me send little notes back about, tell her to rub my knee, tell her to rub my knee again. And when he was in his last few weeks, I have to admit, Teresa called several times. And finally he got so weak that he couldn't talk. But when I got off the phone and he couldn't talk to her, I reached over and he went, thanks, Teresa. I love the sound of the baby. Don't apologize. That's what we're fighting for.
She has a voice.
Good. I came back. This is actually my 5th trip back to Australia. I can't get enough of you people. I love it. I hope I get to come back again. My story hasn't changed. I hope if some of you have heard it that you won't be too bored with it another time. But I think it's important that we share the truth. I want to be sure I don't tell anything that's not the truth, because the other side loves to jump in and point out things that they can catch us on. But I'm here today because of a little girl whom I killed, as you know, through abortion. Her name was Sarah Marie. And I'm doing this because I promised God 8 years ago that when I found out he could forgive me for what I had done, that I would go wherever he sent me. I would do whatever he asked me to do, whether I got spit on, laughed at, snarked at, whatever. Had it all happened too. But I'm here tonight to tell Sarah Marie's story and what I did to her, what it did to me. And when they say abortion is good for women, I can tell you firsthand, women deserve better. I was 39, had 2 children, 19 and 16, and we had a wonderful life. The girls were about ready to take off in a couple years on their own, and we had big plans. When I thought I had the flu, after going to the doctor because the employees said I was getting too grouchy, after examination, he came back and he said, well, lucky for you, lady in the corner, you have a choice. Because I, out of being really amazed that I could possibly have a baby again, because I was told I couldn't, said, "What am I going to do with the baby?" You know, one sentence sometimes, one phrase out of our mouth can change someone else's life forever. And her words changed mine. You see, it was legal. If it hadn't been legal, she wouldn't have said it. I wouldn't have thought of it. Don't misunderstand me. I'm taking full responsibility for what I did. When I said, "What do you mean I have a choice?" She said, "Well, it's not a baby yet. We've caught it in time, and if we get it right away, we can take care of it, and you'll never have to think about it again. It only takes 2 quick treatments, and if we can get you in this week, it'll be just fine. And you won't have to worry about changing your lifestyle or being inconvenient," which was exactly what I wanted to hear. I went home and talked to my husband, and then after that I called and made the 2 appointments. The first appointment was counseling, and they say they're a pro-choice. I say they're poor choice. There is no such thing as choice with them. It's about money, and it's about taking care of you and booting you out. They sent me in a room with a metal table and 2 chairs. I went and sat down, and a few minutes later, a lady came in, sat down, and this was my counseling. These were the choices that they give us, okay? And this is all I got. "Your name is Kay?" "Yes." "And your husband knows you're here?" "Yes." With that, she pushed the paper across the table, handed me a pen, and I agreed to the abortion. They sent me down the hall to put on a hospital gown, and of all the stupid things to have, they had a full-length mirror in the dressing room that I was in. As I was changing clothes and getting into the gown, I, for the first time, noticed there was a bulge in my tummy that had been there. I hadn't thought about it. I wasn't supposed to get pregnant. I had no idea. But I remember touching my stomach and looking at that mirror and seeing the bulge and thinking, if you're going to change your mind, you've got to change it now. But it wasn't a baby. It was inconvenient. I did have plans of my own. And she said I could go and I wouldn't have to think about it anymore. So I completed the gown, waited for them to call my name, and walked down the hall, crawled onto their metal table. They inserted me with what they call saline solution, which is a salt solution. The one thing they didn't lie to me about was they said I'd be slightly uncomfortable, but it wouldn't hurt me too bad. That they finally did tell the truth on one thing. So a little uncomfortable, I went home and waited 2 days for the solution to do whatever it was going to do, to come back for the extraction. Again, I put on the gown, and again I waited for my name to be called and walked down the hall. And again I climbed on their metal table. This time I don't remember too much about the actual extraction or the actual abortion itself. But the thing that changed my life forever, the thing that cost me years of guilt and pain, was after they extracted her burnt little body from mine. They walked past my table, stepped on the garbage can lid, as they tossed her body in front of me that was burnt from the saline solution that they had inserted in me. They took this little body and they threw it in the garbage can, just like a piece of junk, and the lid went clang. And with that noise and that clang, I knew that I had done absolutely the most unforgivable thing that you could ever do. I knew that was not just tissue. That had to have been a body. You see, I was 5 months pregnant. Just tissue, 5 months pregnant. We all know the heart starts about 17 to 21 days. And yet I was 5 months and told she was just tissue. I went hysterical. I could not believe what I had done. And the nurse, in her very nice voice, and I really shouldn't call her a nurse, let's just say the assistant, walked over to me and said, "Kay, if you can't be quiet, I'm going to have to insert you with something because you're scaring all the other ladies." Well, I couldn't be quiet. And so she did insert me with something to keep me quiet, a sedative, and sent me home. You're all here pro-life, so I imagine you know this, but I'm going to state it anyway. You know this is the only procedure that I'm aware of, and if you know of another one, let me know, where after the procedure, you are never asked to come back, you are never given a follow-up call, you are never checked on to make sure you have no problems. And if you should, and you call, and lucky enough to get somebody to answer the phone, they'll tell you to go find your doctor. They're through with you. Tell me it's choice and tell me they care. I went home in a fetal position, knowing that on Monday morning I was going to have to go back to work, back to my flower shop that I owned, that I had been so proud of. And I was going to have to be the same Kay that left on Thursday. I cried and cried and cried. But come Monday morning, I put on a face and I began to build a brick wall. And it was a wall of isolation. It was a wall of depression, of low self-esteem, and of all things, most importantly, it had to stay quiet and it had to be a secret. Because if anybody knew what I had done, now that I realized what I had done, I didn't know how they would react. I'd gone to church all my life, sang in the choir the Thursday before my abortion, but now I knew that God wouldn't want me in his house. I mean, I was a murderer. So I completely dropped away from church altogether. I changed my friends. They were too churchy, if you know what I mean. If they found out, I was sure that they would condemn me. My girls, I'd had a wonderful relationship with my two girls. We'd enjoyed their sports and games and theater and whatever else they got involved in, and but not anymore. I pushed them away as well, because how can you love two and kill a third of your own flesh and blood? I didn't know what to do, because the world says abortion is good, and you can go on and never think about it again. There was something wrong inside me because I wasn't okay. Later on, I would wake up with screams in the night, loud, piercing screams, only to find out they were my own. Because I slept and I dreamed and I would hear that thud and see that little body going in the trash can over and over and over. I would get down on my knees at the foot of the bed and I would beg God, whom I knew would not listen to me because I had killed his creation. But I would get on my knees and say, please, God, if you just give me another chance, I promise I'll be a good mommy this time. I won't blow it. I'll take care of it and I'll do everything I'm supposed to. Please let me have another child. 2 years later, he did bless me with my little, everybody knows, a replacement baby, right? You know what they are. Replacement baby? Do you? Okay. And I thought everything was okay. God has forgiven me. But I hadn't forgiven myself yet. And looking back, my pattern of life that started on the day of the abortion did not change at the birth of my son. I continued to be distant from everybody. I continued to hate myself. I continued to loathe who I was and what I had done. I still ran from my church, and my husband and I fought about it consistently. Although he'd agreed, he would always remind me, you're the one that laid on the table. You're the one that brought the idea home. I just went along with it. You killed our daughter. Well, as time went along, our girls got married, and they gave me grandchildren. But you know what? I could not hold them. It was like burning coals. I could not hold them. They had baby showers before the babies were born. I tried to think of every reason in the world not to go. I mean, I'm the grandma. Grandmas are supposed to be proud, and you can hardly just burst with joy when you see your grandkids and hug them and hold. Not me. But I didn't put everything together. The pain was so great, and I got so tired of hurting and keeping up my defenses and knowing what I'd done, but I couldn't share it with anybody. I tried to commit suicide 2 different times, even after I'd had my son. And when I failed 2 times in trying to kill myself, I told myself, Kay, you are such a rotten piece of crap. I don't know if you use that word in this country or not, but we do. I was such a rotten piece of crap, I could not even kill myself and do it right, which only proved to me I was even less than my husband continued to tell me I was. We had a very ugly divorce. And I'm not going to go into that, but it's in the book. There's a lot I'm leaving out here. But you girls will get a kick out of what I did to him. But anyway. But that's, you got to buy the book for that. But we had a very ugly divorce, and he walked away from not only myself, but my son, taking all his money and all our savings, but leaving all the bills behind. So we had a real struggle for a few months, and we moved into a small apartment, and I thought, now that he's gone and I can build my self-esteem back up and I've got my son to take care of, I'll be okay. I had a good job, but somehow getting out that door from our apartment got harder and harder and harder, and I didn't understand why. One day at work I began to cry, and I cried uncontrollably, and I had to go home. There was no option for me. And as I went home, I told my supervisor I had to go, and as I went home I thought, I am the sole income for my son and I, and we have nothing behind us but my monthly income. I cannot be off work too long. So I stopped by the doctor's office, who had been our family doctor. Now, he was not the abortionist, he was our family doctor. There's a difference between an abortionist and a doctor. He was a doctor. As I walked in the office, the receptionist looked at me, and she could see that I was a whole mess. And so she rushed me down the hall and put me in a little room, a little counseling room, in where I curled up on the Davenport in a fetal position and just could not keep from sobbing and crying. A few minutes later, the doctor came in, and he'd been our family physician for years, and he said, "Kay, what on earth is wrong?" It was 16 years, but I finally said the word and admitted what I had done. I said, "I've done a lot of things," and you'll read it in the book. But the worst of all is I killed my own daughter. I had an abortion, and I just have been living with the guilt, and I want to get rid of the pain. I have tried to kill myself, doctor. Can you help me do that? I just want the pain to end. I want it to be over. I don't want to live anymore. I'm done. And he looked at me and he said, "Kay, there is nothing too big for God. And I will get you some antidepressants, and you will get yourself a counselor. And I will give you 2 weeks. And if you don't have a counselor in 2 weeks, I'll get you one. But we'll get you through this, so don't worry." He was a wonderful help. I was off, as it turns out, for 7 months. I had a nervous breakdown. I not had one counselor, I had 3. But one particular counselor, I had started going to church just once in a while in this little country church, not too far, about 3 blocks from our apartment. And I would sit in the back pew, and when church was over, I would get up and leave before anybody saw me. And I also sat in the back pew because if God saw me and the roof fell in, I could get out quicker than the rest of them. And that's true, that's what I thought. But he offered me help. There was a lady there that was a friend of mine, and she knew I was struggling, so she would often take me to the doctor appointments and come and take me home, because she knew there was times I couldn't get out the door. I would get dressed to go get groceries or to go get my doctor appointment taken care of, and I couldn't get out the door. The door was just too heavy for me to open. I just had so much guilt, so much pain, I couldn't get out that door. So she would come and take me. And on Sundays, she gave me an ultimatum. She said, "Kay, I know you come to church sometimes, but you need to start coming every Sunday, because this is your answer. So I'm going to give you until the second song, and at the end of the second song, if you're not here in the church, I don't care if it's in the back pew or not, but if you're not in this church, I'm jumping in the car, I'm driving 3 blocks, and I'm bringing you. You want to come in your pajamas or your bikinis? That's fine with me, but you're coming to church with me." And I found out she meant it, so I usually got dressed. But the pastor there was one of the 3 counselors that God placed in my path. The other 2 were professionals, and although they had their part in my healing, the pastor was the one who really led me to true understanding. He himself was dying of 4-stage cancer, and he had but weeks to live. And I can appreciate now the time that he spent with me when he could have spent it with his family now that I've just lost my husband. And in those counseling sessions, although I had gone to church all my life and I'd worn a cross around my neck, I began to understand the Bible was really, truly, honestly God's Word. It came alive, and things like, your sins are as far as the east is from the west. Have you ever seen a compass? You know how far the east is from the west? They never meet. And he pointed that out to me. And he said, your sins are blotted out. You're as white as snow once you've repented and asked for forgiveness. I hadn't been able to grasp that. You see, God forgave me the first time I cried out to him. But I had never forgiven myself. He also said, behold, I make all things new. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight you're looking at new, although she's kind of old. If you know what I mean. But it was during this time that he began to read Scripture, and I couldn't get enough of the Bible. I couldn't get enough of the Word, because I found out that even a woman who'd had an abortion, who had done the many things that I had done on top of that, even me, God could reach down far enough into the muck and mire I had placed myself in, pull me out, and make me a new creature. And believe me, if you've ever felt totally lost, totally unforgivable, totally hated, self-loathing, depressed, and then suddenly found out that the Creator you thought turned his back on you never turned his back on me. I turned my back on him. And when I understood that, and there were a couple tricks that my pastor pulled on me to get me to understand. When you understand this, you've got it made. The first thing was, Kay, your sins are forgiven and everything is okay. And I kept saying, you don't understand. You don't understand, Pastor. I killed my daughter. I had an abortion. She was a real human being in my own body, and I killed her. He said, I know. You're forgiven. I said, you don't understand. How can you forgive somebody who kills their own flesh and blood? I mean, it's like you're not listening to me. Will you listen to me? And he said, Kay, I hear you perfectly. You don't think you're forgivable. I said, no, I really don't. I really don't. And tears were streaming down my face. He said, but you have been forgiven. You have to forgive. I said, you don't understand. I killed my daughter. Don't you understand? I can't be forgiven. I'm unforgivable. And he sat there at his desk, dying of cancer, very thin, very weak, pushed back from his desk just a little bit. He had one of the rolling chairs that they have in the desks, if you know what I'm talking about. You've got those here, don't you? Nobody's nodding. Okay. He pushed back from that desk and he folded his arms and he began to rock in the chair. So, boy, Kay, you're really special. I said, Doctor, did you not hear what I have been telling you? He said, yeah, I heard you. You're really special. I said, how do you figure that? I'm unforgivable. He said, no, I want you to hear what you've just told me. He said, you've just told me that God sent his son on this earth to die on a cross, to live 32 years as an example, then to walk up Calvary to be beaten, humiliated, stripped of his clothing, stabbed with a sword, stuck with a horrendous, if you've ever seen the thorns, they're huge, crown of thorns on his head, and to hang on the cross and die. And it was good enough for everybody else in the world to be forgiven, but it's not good enough for you. What? He was right. And it wasn't pride, but in my poor self-image, I had felt I was so low that God's sacrifice wasn't enough for me. It was like somebody took a wet washcloth and crossed my face. The other thing he said, remember Peter? Do you all remember Peter? Good old impetuous Peter? I love Peter. I'm impetuous too. But Peter, he walked on water. He saw miracles. He saw multiplication of bread and loaves. He walked with Christ and saw all the things that Christ did. And on the night in Gethsemane, he cut off a guy's ear to protect Jesus. And Jesus put it kindly back on. But Peter said, Jesus, I will protect you. I will take care of you. Don't you worry. I'll get him to go away. And Jesus said, no, Peter, that's not the way. And besides that, you're going to deny me 3 times tonight. Not me, Lord, not me. I've seen the miracles. I know you had me walk on. I would never do that. And yet we know biblically he did 3 times. And Peter went away in guilt. But resurrection morning came, and they came to the tomb, and what were they told? He is risen. He is not here. Go tell the disciples and Peter. And he said, it's just like he said, go tell the world that Jesus has overcome any sin. Go tell the world, but oh, by the way, go tell Kay. Because you see, Peter wouldn't have come if Jesus hadn't called him by name, because Jesus knew how desperately lonely, how desperately abandoned he felt because he had let his Lord down. And that's where I was. I had let my Lord down. When I finally got it through my thick little German head that Jesus was more than enough for anyone, that his sacrifice was good enough for even me, I remember I laid on the floor prostrate one night, and I said, God, just use me. I can't earn heaven, I know that, but if you've ever felt completely lost, completely useless, completely no good, a nothing, a nobody, and then found out that your God still loves you and still has plans for good for you, I suggest to you, you cannot keep it to yourself. So I said, God, just use me. If they want to spit, I've told you, if they want to spit, if they want to throw rocks, and they've done it all, I said, just use me. 2 weeks later, I think the pastor ratted on me, I'm not sure, but a little church just a couple blocks on the other side of us, it was very small. The pastor called me and he said, Kay, your name's Kay Painter? I said, yeah. He said, I heard from a friend that you have a story to tell, and we're a very small church and we're having a ladies' retreat for the weekend, and we can't afford a speaker. If we gave you a ride up there and your meals, would you come and share your story? And I said, guess I will. I promised God, yeah, I'll come. And that was the beginning. I also had to tell my children, and you'll read about that in the book, and if you think anything is very difficult, you ought to look your children in the eye and tell them that you've killed their brother or their sister. But my children are amazing, as you will discover. After I did that, I was in Washington, D.C. When I met a lady, I was working at a table. I had joined a group called Operation Outcry I did not know anything about, other than I knew that God was calling me to speak out. And they'd asked me to work their table in Washington, D.C. at the March for Life. And I was working it when this blonde lady with this funny accent, I didn't recognize it at the time. I know now it was Aussie. But she came up and she started asking all these questions. And she said, well, do you tell your story? And I said, well, I'm starting to. And she said, we don't have anybody in Australia that will talk up and tell their story. Would you come? And I said, I'd love to come to Australia, but I don't have the money and I don't know. And she said, well, let's just stay in contact. So we did. That night, a lady that was rooming with me in the hotel room there in D.C., we were on our knees praying, and that night she said, God just gave me a word for you. She said, he just said, go build stamina, both physically and spiritually, for I have a journey for you. And I thought, could it possibly be Australia? The next morning, we had to head out for home, And there were, I wanted to keep the I had an abortion sign because I didn't have one back home and it wouldn't fit in the suitcase. So I'm going down the airport in Washington, D.C. carrying this sign that says, I've had an abortion. And people are going, you know? But I got to where my gate was, and there was a nun with about, probably 30, 35 teenagers. And they were running around, you know how kids are. And they were probably 13, 15 in that age group. And I'm carrying this sign, and she looks at the sign, and she looks at me, and she said, are you one of those ladies that tell their story? And I said, well, I'm trying to be. And she said, if I could get him to sit down, would you possibly tell your story before we get on the plane? And I said, sure. So she got them all sitting on the floor. I told the story, and about that time, it was time to board the plane. We got on the plane, and lo and behold, the sister is sitting next to me. And I said, you do this every year? And she said, no. She said, we don't always come here. She said, last year we took the children to England. And she said, this year we brought them to the March of the Life. But next year, she said, they're going to have to build up a lot of stamina because we're going to Australia. And I began to cry. And she said, what on earth did I say? I said, I think you just confirmed something for me. And that was the beginning of my ministry. This is my 25th international trip. God has financed every one and opened every single door. And Cherish Life and other organizations that fight for life, I'm going to tell you, the other side is out there and they are brutal. And I'm sure you're aware of that. I encourage you to get behind your leader, get behind Teresa. Do something. If it's only licking stamps, whatever it is you can do to help, do it. Because the other side, sometimes I think we're winning and then I think we're losing, and I don't know. But in America, we have a 9/11 every day. You hear about 9/11, but you don't hear about the other 364 days where we lose just as many citizens in America through abortion. We've got to stop it, guys. We've got to stop it. And if we don't tell them, I don't know who will. The churches are getting silent, unfortunately. And the media certainly isn't going to tell them. So I encourage you, do whatever you can, do whatever you're asked. Speak to someone. If they talk to you about it, be sure and tell them the truth, because they're not going to get it anywhere else. And I thank you for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you too long, and I'll give you back to Teresa.
That's Facebook there, and she's more than happy to sign it for you.
Another thing too. God told me I couldn't keep the profits of the book. So the profits will go to pro-life organizations here in Australia. When I go to Spain, they'll stay in Spain. When I go I don't keep any of the money, only the money to turn the books. I'm just a one-man band here, okay? But I will tell you one little story real quick, may I? Yeah, I wrote the book and my husband helped me. And I turned it over to the publisher. We signed it just before Ken died. I wanted him to know that the book was going to be published. And I had him sign the contract too, not thinking any farther than I wanted him to know the book was going to be published. And the publisher took the copy, and I didn't think anything more about it, because with losing my husband, there was just too much other to worry about, and I was having a really big pity party that he got to go and I had to stay. But about the end of January, I got a phone call from him, and he said, well, guess what? I said, what? He said, the book is ready to go. And I said, really, already? And he said, yeah. He said, the editor was working on it, and she had made some changes. She's been working on it for about 10 days now. And she was working on it, and she and her husband always take a walk after they have dinner. And they walk their dog. And he said, while she was walking, she felt God said, those are my words, leave them alone. So she's not changing anything but the punctuation and the capital, that kind of stuff. And I had, in the meantime, met a man in Melbourne who was making a book of stories of women with abortions, and he'd asked if he could use mine, and I said, absolutely. So I lifted it out of the book and sent it down to him, and he sent me a release to sign so he could use the book, stating that he might want to change it And if he did, that he had permission. So I wrote, yes, you can, but I want to read the changes before I give you permission. And about, I don't know, maybe 2 months later, I got an email back from him, and he said, we were starting to edit it, and we just felt like God said, leave it alone. So this is God's book. It's not mine, so I'm not keeping the prophets. God said not to. I think there's something in there for everyone. And please, if you do get it and you do like it, I would ask you to go on Amazon and put a little remark on there for me. And don't put the book on the shelf, because it's not about how many books I sell. It's about how many people get healed. And there's some wonderful things that God gave me in that book that I think would help anyone draw closer to Him. So please consider the book, but it's not for me. It's for you, and it's for somebody else out there that you might know that needs it. Okay.
Normally we give our guest speakers a normal, nice, really lovely present. I never give them food to eat or alcohol or anything to drink, because I want them to have something to take back that they can remember us by, and it has to be something that's allowed legally into their country, which is the other issue. No, it's not. But Kay may or may not wish to open this here. It's nothing naughty, but it is rather amusing. And what I wanted to do is, because now, sadly, she's got to do all the washing up, etc. herself, and standing at her kitchen sink, I wanted every time she looked up to get a little chuckle and think about this crazy people back in Australia. So it's not an expensive gift, it's just an amusing one for Kay to take back. So the book is $15. Kay, as I said, is happy to sign it for you if you like, and we're blessed to be able to read it before it went to print. Woo-woo! So I'm very excited.
Teresa endorsed it too, by the way.
That's all right. So put that on.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So feel free to stay and have a drink or whatever. If anyone wants a book, please come up and have a chat to Kay.
I'm going to put this over here.